Greetings. This is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're looking at the fourth issue of Weird Tales, published in June 1923. I believe this illustration is supposed to be for the Murders on the Rue Morgue, which is being reprinted in this issue. It's by Heitman, the same artist who did the cover of the previous issue, which I felt was more successful. This seems to be a scene in the middle of the action, yet the poses are very stiff, and the monkey has some serious anatomical problems. His left arm, where's his shoulder? I'm not sure. It's very strange. In any case, let's see what the content is like. Hopefully it'll be better than the cover. The table of contents tells us there are 16 short stories, 2 novelettes, and again, 2 two-part stories. So the conclusion of one and the start of the next one. They've been very consistent with this, and I guess the idea is to hook the people with one story and then get them to buy the following issue and keep going like that. So far, I've found that a lot of these stories are a little bit lackluster. So this marketing strategy probably wouldn't have worked for me, but there are some other good stories, which meant that I would likely purchase some issues had I been alive in 1923. The first story is called The Evening Wolves, and it concerns a man who will go to visit someone in Chinatown. He was part of a gang of thieves and crooks, and he's trying to get away from them. This man he went to see, whose name is Ah Wing, agrees to help him get rid of his pursuers, of his former gang. He will bring the man to his house in the countryside. The house is filled with strange things, strange flowers. The man, sort of like being left alone, decides to check out the house and is confronted at one point with a very large snake. His former colleagues try to get into the house and fall to traps or other mishaps, and there are 2 of them left when we're told that the story will conclude in the next issue of Weird Tales. The story flows well. It didn't grip me as much as others. It was an easy read, and it certainly wasn't a slog. Also, if you look at the story that's going to be concluding in this issue and that started in the last one, the one called The Moon Terror, well, basically the antagonists are ancient cult from somewhere in China. In here, the Chinese character Ah Wong is the good guy, as much as there's a good guy in here, though he is very odd, and it totally goes into all the cliches that maybe existed at the time. What's interesting is the way he's described is that if he's wearing traditional Chinese clothes, he appears to be a Caucasian who is badly disguised as an Asian. And if he's wearing European style clothes or American style clothes, he appears to be an Asian badly disguised as a European. So maybe he's in the middle of the two, straddling both worlds but part of neither. But certainly they play on the whole mystical and ancient knowledge mystique that was very common in those days. In any case, we'll see how it concludes in the next issue. The next story is called Desert Madness, and it's a straight up Western action story. There's no real supernatural or eerie aspects to it. Flows quickly, tight writing. This was one of the stories I enjoyed the most in this issue. This action-packed story is a bit of a precursor to some of the stories that Weird Tales would be well known for. I'm thinking here like the Conan stories and other more action-oriented things, because it wasn't just Lovecraft and the kind of cosmic horror mood pieces that Weird Tales was known for. Next, we have The Jailer of Souls by someone who's pretty much a regular in Weird Tales, Hamilton Craigie. It's very much in the mood of westerns. However, it's set in more modern times. People have telephones, cars, and they do mention several times that in this town, while there used to be ranchers, the ranchers are now gone. The economy runs on other things. There are no real cowboys left, though everybody still wears a Stetson hat. Before I even go into recap of what this story is, I just want to go over my problem with it. And it's that it seems to not have been planned out properly. So the main character arrives in town, is warned away by twice before he even gets off the train, is told he should leave town once he's there. He seems to be there to investigate someone, a local lawyer who seems to be involved with some unsavory deals. At first, we don't understand why. We eventually find out that he's looking for his father, and the trail of clues he has found led to the town of Drybone. But then we also find out he's apparently a federal agent, and they're investigating the same lawyer. I feel that was introduced later, and it was because, oh, he's going to need some help to get out of whatever fix he's in, so I need to provide a reason. It would have been better if he was either someone looking for his father or someone investigating this lawyer. And what it turns out is these people, they would capture bankers or other well-to-do people, force them to sign checks made out to cash, and basically drain them of money. Meanwhile, they were imprisoned in an asylum. One of the doctors there is what we would today call a plastic surgeon, and he would change the people's appearance so that when they say, "Hey, I'm so and so," no one believes them because they don't look like the person they claim to be. It's mostly action oriented, and I find it seems to have been written out without a plan ahead of time. You can't blame pulp writers. I'm sure many of them had to do it. Is the first draft is what ended up being sent to the magazine because of the tight deadline, but it sometimes shows, and in this case it really does. The next story is Jack a Mystery, and as the subtitle indicates, it is a ghost story. It starts in the offices of a private detective who is visited by a lady who claims that her husband and her have just purchased a house. The house is haunted. Her husband, while a wonderful man, is very superstitious and wants to get rid of the house, even though they just moved in, because it's haunted by a ghost. And she asks the detective to investigate as to what could be the cause of the ghosts. We do find out there had been a murder and suicide in the house, so it's got a bad reputation to begin with. The detective will investigate. During the investigation, or near the end of the investigation, the husband, who's been pushing to get rid of the house, finally gives in to his wife's wishes to keep the house. While it is haunted, she really likes the location and the house itself and everything. And so the very last scene is the detective reading his report that he was going to present to her. The conclusion is that all the hauntings were done by the husband because he didn't want to live out in the countryside. He preferred to live in the city, but he didn't realize just how much his wife wanted to be in this house. And eventually he changed his mind, so the report didn't need to be submitted because it would only cause strife. I quite liked it. A mix of the ghost story with the detective story and the ghost turning out to be a fake, compared to a lot of the ghost stories I've seen in these pages and others, is a bit refreshing. Though anyone who's watched Scooby-Doo knows that people faking ghosts has become quite common these days. In any case, well written enough and enjoyable. Next, we have a short story called Osiris, and it is the story of a lawyer who is brought in by one of his clients, who's an Egyptologist, to make his will, something he'd been putting off forever, but now he's in a big hurry to do it. After they've done it, they share a drink, and the lawyer says, "Well, what made you want to do this so quickly? You didn't even want me to take the time to draft the will properly in my office. We had to do it right away this evening. How come?" And the Egyptologist will tell him how he broke into the tomb of Osiris, the Egyptian god. And he suspects that the god will take his revenge, which is why he wanted his will made out. As the Egyptologist tells the story, it ends with, "Oh my God, behind you." The lawyer turns around and sees a strange shadow that's maybe not a shadow. While all this happened, the Egyptologist just falls over and dies. and the lawyer, meanwhile, just screams and runs out of the house into the night. A fun little tale, short, certainly not longer than it needs to be, and not shorter than it needs to be. It has the quality of being a tightly written story that is so pleasing to read. Next, we have The Well. I mentioned a few issues ago how it was filled with really unpleasant characters, and well, none of them hold a candle up to the unpleasant character in this story. He's a farmer. He has a land dispute with his neighbor. They've been going back and forth through lawyers, trying to get it all sorted, but it's been going on for a couple of years now. He sees his neighbor near the property line and approaches him. The altercation escalates, and he will beat the man to death. He will then throw the body down a nearby well. What will happen is no one knows where the dead man is. His actions haunt him. He can't sleep. He is afraid of somebody finding the body. Eventually, he will go crazy, run to the well, and throw himself in it. As I mentioned, this character is thoroughly unpleasant. He's a tyrant to his family. I really felt the ending was, well, good for him. The story's well written, but I really disliked the character, so it made me lukewarm on the story. But I guess if you really dislike a character like that, the writer has done something correctly, has done something well. Next, we have The Phantom Wolfhound, and it is about two friends, one of whom is a doctor. He will refer him to one of his patients who says he is haunted by a ghost, but it's the ghost of a dog. Moving to another house doesn't help. The ghost of the dog still appears. What's interesting is at first it seems to be just the head of the dog, like the eyes that he sees at night. Eventually he sees the whole head, then a small body, and slowly over time the body grows larger until it's the size of a wolfhound, a Russian wolfhound. It turns out the man's family is his partner and his niece, because his sister and her husband have passed away and he is now the guardian of their child. Before the haunting started, he killed his niece's dog that her parents had given her before they died because he didn't like the dog. So the doctor and his friend will investigate this ghost to see if they can help this man. They set up a set of cameras. They give him a switch that will cause all the flash powder and the cameras to go off to hopefully take a photo of the ghost. And what happens is on the night that they do this, they discover that the wolfhound actually emanates from the little girl's body while she sleeps. So she is unaware that she is causing this dog to manifest. The man does set off the cameras, but he also is dead of a heart attack caused by fear. When they develop the photos, they do find photos of a large dog biting at the man's throat. They also discover evidence that the man was slowly poisoning his niece in order to inherit the money that she had inherited from her deceased parents. So the conclusion is, yes, we were too late to save him from this ghostly manifestation of the dog, but we saved her, and we wouldn't have saved him from the gallows. Maybe he deserved his fate. The next story is the second installment of Masterpieces of Weird Fiction. And here the magazine redeems itself after the awful, awful sequel to The Cask of Amontillado by publishing The Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe. This is a classic. I love it. It's one of those stories of deduction worthy of Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. It's just great. It's worth reading. It's also the story that has been chosen for the cover, which unfortunately could have been a little bit better in my opinion. There's really not much else to say. If you haven't read it, go get yourself a collection of Poe and read it. Next, we have the conclusion of The Moon Terror, which was started in the previous issue. To remind you, the protagonists were fighting some sort of secret cult from somewhere in Asia that are trying to create a new moon by causing earthquakes in the earth, and so that a chunk of the earth would detach itself and go in orbit. And the story ended as a huge crack opened up in the earth and the characters were about to fall into the crack. A classic cliffhanger ending to entice you to buy the next issue of the magazine. Of course, the narrator wakes up and he's on a ledge a little bit down, so he's didn't fall all the way down into the abyss. Can't see his companion. He decides he's going to start to climb out as the crack in the earth starts to close. So it's a race between him and the movement of the earth to see if he will manage to get out in time. He thinks he's going to be stuck, screams in despair, and his companion, who had managed to avoid falling down, finds him with some other people who were searching for him, and they bring out a rope and pull him up just in the nick of time to save him. There follow a whole bunch of adventures. They realize they can't contact the outside world. The radio they thought to use on one of the boats has been taken away. It's a lot of action. It's kind of fun. The only thing where my disbelief was not willing to be suspended, and boy, do you have to suspend your disbelief with some of these early stories. You have to think, this was written before tectonic plates were a thing. How earthquakes work was a major mystery. When a group of people decide we will attack the boat by swimming to it. Now, this is set somewhere in Alaska. I've been in the water in the Pacific, much further south, and it's already freezing cold there, and you're not going to last more than 10 minutes. So I doubt you will swim across a bay and then climb up out of the water onto a boat and be in any shape to fight. It could be seen as a minor quibble, but it sure didn't help my immersion in the story. It's one of those stories that's filled with what we think of as the cliches of pulp fiction, so it's fun to read if you take it in that spirit. The next story is called The Man the Law Forgot. And it's about a young man who gets taken into a youth gang and he starts to commit a variety of small crimes, thefts, and larceny type stuff. Somebody gets killed. He is caught, condemned to death for the murder, even though he claims he didn't commit it. He is hung. Harking back to a story in the previous issue, people take his body as quickly as possible and work to revive him, which they succeed in doing. Because he has been legally declared dead, the law doesn't recognize him for good or ill. He can't get arrested again. He cannot get married. With all this, he basically turns back into a life of crime. And he tries to get back together with his sweetheart. But in the meantime, she is with another man. Seeing what he did to her, this other man will just grab a shotgun and kill the protagonist, thus solving the problem of what to do with a man who is alive but legally dead. A fun little story. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the reviving somebody after the hanging was taken from the previous issue where something like that happens. It's an interesting take to see how the law would treat something like that. The Blade of Vengeance is about a man, Henry Fane, who marries a young woman. Everybody around him sees she is just a gold digger and doesn't care for him at all, but he refuses to see that for himself. After the marriage, she just keeps going out, cheating on him, treating him pretty badly, ruining his life, and he will disappear, will be presumed dead, and she will just continue her life with his money. Eventually, she will meet him again, and realizing it's him, will act contrite and convince him that him killing her would not be real vengeance, but forcing her to live a proper life would be. Discloses this, but he overhears. At the end, she is found in her bed with a knife, and it is the Blade of Vengeance. I have to say the scene when the body is discovered is quite well written. While the plot is not particularly groundbreaking in any way, it's stylistically quite well done. The next story is The Grey Death. This is about two explorers in the Amazonian jungle who arrive at a point where their local guides refuse to go, claiming it's a taboo place to go. They decide to forge ahead. There's signs that something's different there. and they find an area of ground that is isolated from the rest of the forest by sand. In the middle of this sand is a large area of rotting gray things. Anything that it touches, it consumes. The only thing it can't consume is silicon. One of them decides he's going to try and get a sample using glass. They build what I feel is a rather rickety container for something so dangerous. The one who wants the sample will actually end up being consumed by the thing, and his friend will, as he pleads for it, shoot him so that he doesn't feel any more pain. It's one of those things that can consume everything stories. It hints at cosmic horror. And the end is simply that the partner leaves and nothing is done about this thing. So the reason it can't spread is because the sand is, of course, silicon, but that's the only thing keeping the world safe, if you will. It's not quite cosmic horror, but something that you can see will lead to cosmic horror. This was quite a good story, well told overall, going in that direction that we know Weird Tales and other such magazines will go in a not too distant future, actually. The following story, The Voice in the Fog, is about a ship's engineer who will disapprove of a man that his daughter is interested in, and it will enrage him. He will, under a false pretense, get that man on board the ship, knock him unconscious, and dump him in one of the boilers, and then fill it with water and start it up. The idea being that it'll, of course, make the body disappear, except that there are some strange events. Clearly, it's his conscience working on him. He starts drinking more. Eventually, during a storm, there's a call for help from another ship. They rescue these people. As it turns out, one of those crew members is the young man who the engineer thought he'd killed. He'd managed to escape out of the boiler before the heat got turned up. Average story, nothing supernatural or weird, though the ship's engineer and his conscience and his drinking, because he does turn to alcohol, make him think there might be a ghost or something there. The next story is The Invisible Terror. First problem is that the subtitle, An Uncanny Tale of the Jungle, is totally wrong. This is not set in the jungle. It seems to be more of a Western North American setting than anything. It's about a farming community. People have witnessed some strange goings on, something invisible moving around. It kills animals and it's killed people. And the local sheriff decides to take matters in hand and hunt it down. He will set a trap. What's going to happen is that they'll lie in ambush. The creature will come. They will shoot it. They won't find a body. They'll assume that it has sunk into a nearby pool where they were, and they'll assume that it must be dead. And that's the end of the story. And it ends kind of like, what? We never find out what the creature actually is. They seem to take for granted it was killed because they found some blood. No, not a good story. I really was disappointed by this one. This is followed by The Escape, which is about a man who just was diagnosed with appendicitis. He does not want to be put under anesthetic because he is convinced that while he's asleep or unconscious, he will talk. He, a few years ago, killed his wife, though he was never found guilty of this. It was assumed that it was somebody who broke into the house who killed her. He's just worried that he would babble about this while he was under anesthesia. The appendicitis does get worse. He is rushed to the hospital, put under, operated on. When he wakes up, he's convinced he said something. When he finds out that there's police nearby, he's convinced they're there for him. And rather than be arrested, he will kill himself. Not a very pleasant character, but that kind of typical early Weird Tale story that aims to shock with death and unsavory happenings. The Siren is a much less disturbing tale. It concerns a work crew, and people often get sick and pass away. And the doctor keeps telling the foreman and the engineers to stay away from the nearby water because it's got typhoid and other things in it. We see this from the point of view of one man who regularly meets a young woman. She makes him drink some of the water. There are hints that she is not just human. This drinking of the water will cause the man to eventually die. The doctor and the foreman aren't aware of what actually is happening. This was a fun little one. I quite enjoyed it, much more than the previous story. The Madman concerns a young man who has gone mad, and only two people actually know what happened. This young man was hired by a university to be the caretaker for the medical building. And because this medical building is quite out of the way, the only way they can get somebody there is to offer them a place to stay. And the room he is offered is actually right next to the morgue. Two of the students decide to play a prank on this caretaker, and they'll sneak in, lie down in the morgue, cover themselves with sheets. There's an actual body there, and that body moves. The two students are so afraid they don't dare move and remain still as, well, corpses, while this third body will not do much except be seen to move by the caretaker, cause him extreme fear and panic. The so-called body was in a state of suspended animation, and then after his brief revival, he actually died. An okay story, but it just didn't do much for me. The Chair is one of those stories where they aim to shock more than anything. It purports to be an actual eyewitness description, specifically by the doctor who witnesses the execution. And I think they're going for shock here, and it doesn't do much for me. Next, there was a little section that's a new section here called The Cauldron, where the magazine invites people to write in and tell of weird or strange things they've experienced or witnessed. I do have to wonder how many of these are fictional or not. And finally, we have the Eerie, which is the editorial/letters column. The last time they promised they'd talk about why so many cats and Asians appear in stories, as well as rattlesnakes and skulls. They talk about how so many of the manuscripts they get feature these things, and they wonder why. And is it perhaps because both cats and Asians seem to be good props because they both mind their own business and they take care of their stuff and ignore others? They don't know what the reason is, and they just reiterate that they don't care if there are or are not cats or any other things, rattlesnakes and skulls in a story, as long as it's a good story. Calling for quality in fiction, which unfortunately isn't always answered. At least they're striving. We'll do a quick accounting of cats, apes, and Asians. So the Evening Wolves features prominently an Asian whose strange house the gangster stays in, and the Desert Madness has also an Asian character, so that's two. Cats are often associated with ancient Egypt, where they were considered sacred, but don't feature in Osiris, so still no cats. The Murders in the Rue Morgue is the OP of weird stories featuring apes or monkeys, and it's the cover story to boot, so it still just counts as one, but it's there. The Moon Terror, the conclusion of the serial started last issue, has that weird secret society from somewhere in China or Tibet or something, so another Asian, that's three. The Voice in the Fog, they rescue the crew of a Japanese ship. While the Japanese are just mentioned, I'll still count it. So that's a fourth one for Asian. And that's it. So we have 4 Asians, 0 cats, 1 ape, but it's a big one. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, reading the June 1923 issue of Weird Tales, and I'll see you next time.